Welcome back, everybody. Thanks so much for joining us. Make sure you share this with your friends right at the outset. You're with the American Battlefield Trust. We're on Little Round Top. This is part 2 of our Gettysburg 158 Little Round Top coverage. You sort of saw we went over the hill already and covered some of the main fighting, but not the most famous fighting by any means. And we're going to be covering some of that and more with some cool surprises before we're even done. That's Kris White behind the camera, and this is our, like I said, Gettysburg 158 coverage. Now, we're trying to focus on people and units during this particular live set, and if you want more of the military stuff, go to Gettysburg 154, 55, 56, and 57 to see. In fact, last year we had some extensive coverage right here on Vincent Spur, which is where we stand. But just in a nutshell, I think you know what happens. This is the end of the Union line for a while. The flank had been in about 8 other places already, but for about an hour, the 20th Maine under Colonel Joshua Lawrence Chamberlain is going to hold this spur. In fact, that left flank didn't hold, and will eventually move to this left flank of the Union Army, and then it'll be on Big Round Top and elsewhere. But of course, there's a very famous fight that's going to take place here, in which Alabamians, generally the 15th Alabama, will attack the 20th Maine several times. Eventually, the 20th Maine, running out of all steam, will eventually charge into the exhausted Alabamians, who run like a herd of wild cattle back up Big Round Top, and then the battle continues on, and the war continues on from there. One of the reasons, of course, you could point to John J. Pullen's 20th Maine, and you could point to the Ken Burns series, but I think that even influencing Ken Burns, and the main reason the 20th Maine is, probably famous, is because of Michael Shaara. And we're really happy to have as a guest, you know him already, Jeff Shaara, of course, Michael's son. So first of all, New York Times best-selling author many times over, and of course, author of the prequel and the sequel to The Killer Angels. So tell us a little bit about yourself first.
Well, I write books, which is something I never set out to do. My father passed away in 1988 and never saw the success the Killer Angels has had since then, which is how I became a writer, because Ted Turner, who made the movie Gettysburg based on the Killer Angels, and probably more people have seen the movie than have read the book, but realize that the book is the movie. It's so close. People wanted more of that, and Ted Turner said, what if we took the Killer Angels, going both directions, before and after? I had never written anything before, but I thought it's something I'd like to try, and Gods and Generals was the before, the prequel, and that book was successful to my great surprise and made me a writer. And now 18 books later, here I am. So I don't take that for granted, and clearly my father passed a torch that he didn't live to see.
And so to say the least, Joshua Chamberlain and the other 5 or so main characters in the Killer Angels changed your life. So, it must have been a good story. I mean, that's what you do, that's what your dad did. So why Chamberlain? Let's get into that a little bit.
Well, you said it exactly, Gary. It's about a story. I'm not a historian, I'm not an academic. My father certainly was not. What he was is the ultimate, and what I've tried to be, the storyteller. The guy who, puts the characters in place, puts dialogue in their mouths, it tells the honest, it tells the truth, but it has to be called fiction because of the dialogue. I mean, nobody will ever know exactly what Strong Vincent said to Joshua Chamberlain, up here, but we know approximately what happened, and that's my job, is to fill in the blanks. Well, for a storyteller, Little Round Top, this is gold. I mean, this is a treasure up here, because the story of Joshua Chamberlain and the 20th Maine, and Colonel Oates and the 15th Alabama, this is what stories are made of. You have drama is putting it mildly. The entire success for a while, the entire success of the Union line down on this end depended on what Joshua Chamberlain did. And, and that's something a lot of people don't realize. It's not just about the charge, it's not just about bayonets and down the hill we go. It's about the meaning of that. And one thing you notice where I'm standing right here, if you look behind me, back here, there's nothing there. I mean, you go right off the mountain here. So this was Chamberlain's last stand right here. And if he's pushed away, if he's driven back, they're going to fall off the mountain. I mean, there's no place else left to go. However, if the Alabamans take over, they're going to go that way, right down the Union line, right where, behind Little Round Top, where the 144th New York is, where the other regiments that are holding that line, all of a sudden a bunch of Alabamans are going to come in from behind them, and that's a disaster. So that's, the sort of history lesson combined with the drama that makes it such a good story. And what Chamberlain does here, and I'll say one thing else. Over the years, Killer Angels has been around almost 50 years. It was published in 1974. Over the years, there's been a few people who've, said, well, there were other heroes on Little Round Top too. Well, of course there were. There were loads of them. There were, Chamberlain was awarded the Medal of Honor for what he did here. By definition, that makes him a hero. But certainly there were 63 medals of honor given for people at Gettysburg, for Union soldiers at Gettysburg. So clearly, there were a lot of heroes here. All my father did, my father never says, and I've had people argue this with me, he never says in the Killer Angels, well, Joshua Chamberlain saved the day. That if it wasn't for Joshua Chamberlain, the Union would have lost the battle. That's not true. And he knew it wasn't true, and it doesn't say that anywhere in the Killer Angels. All it says is this particular piece of ground right here, this was where Chamberlain fought, and Chamberlain did the decisive thing, made the right decision to save this piece of ground. And what might have happened had he failed, well, it's anybody's guess. But it's a good story. And that's what I want people to get, that's the take I want people to get from this.
And I think one of the things that makes it a good story too, and your father no doubt seized upon this, is Chamberlain's not a professional soldier. I mean, he's a professor of all things. I mean, there's a lot of things that could put you far from a soldier. I'm sure there's some things that could put you farther from a soldier than a professor, but there's not too many of them. Did that play a big part, you think?
Oh, I think it played a huge part for my father. My father was a professor. That's what he did. He taught creative writing and literature at Florida State. And I think when he read about Chamberlain, began to research the character, he saw himself. This is a great character. This is the academic historian, or the academic, not historian, the academic who wants to be a soldier, who wants to get out there, and that's exactly what Chamberlain does. And I think my father had a certain fantasy about that for himself. So clearly, the words that go into Chamberlain's mouth in The Killer Angels, to some extent, that's my father talking. And I mean, I get a big kick out of that.
That's really cool. You're with the American Battlefield Trust. We're with New York Times bestselling author Jeff Shaara. That's Kris White behind the camera. This is our Gettysburg 158 coverage. We're on Vincent Spur, on Little Round Top at Gettysburg. And we're talking about Joshua Chamberlain, sort of the person and the story. And maybe we'll walk and talk a little bit, because it looks like nobody's over at the 20th Maine, which is pretty incredible for an anniversary time while we have this moment. So maybe if you're willing, Jeff, so Joshua Chamberlain, becomes sort of famous, especially after the book, after Ken Burns, after the Gettysburg movie.
Right.
How did that affect you? You already said a few people like to argue with you about what your father did. What about after the Gettysburg movie and you became a more public figure with your books?
Well, Ken Burns took his version of Chamberlain from The Killer Angels. He definitely was influenced by my father's book. He says that. He said it many times. And I think that just sort of takes the Killer Angels version of Chamberlain and expands it quite a bit, the same version. Not that Ken got it wrong by any means, but he expands sort of I hate to say myth, but in a way it's the sort of mythological stature of Joshua Chamberlain. But at the end of the day, what he did was extraordinary and deserves praise, and deserves to be talked about, and deserves to be remembered. And also, at the end of the day, too, The Killer Angels is a good book. Regardless, I hope someone will say that about my stuff. That's the goal. The goal is not to lionize some particular historical figure, it's to tell a good story. My father succeeded beyond his possible imagination. He had no idea what would happen. He died in 1988. The film Gettysburg came out in 1993. 5 years later, made a book a #1 bestseller. Now, an author who doesn't see his greatest success, well, that's a shame. That's really a bittersweet thing in my family. But what he left behind is probably the greatest story ever told about the Battle of Gettysburg.
Very interesting. Let's walk a little bit further here, because I've got more for Jeff on this. But It is interesting. Ken Burns, you know, heavily influenced by the Killer Angels, spent more time on the 20th Maine than he did on all of the first day and all the rest of the second day combined. So, I mean, that there is a real influence there, but, you know, he wanted to tell a good story too. He's a documentary filmmaker, and you can't focus on everybody, and that's what he chose to do. Now, we can't resist, Jeff. We're going down to the 20th Maine's monument. He already knows where I'm headed, and that monument was placed by the veterans and supposedly on the spot where the colors stood during the battle, okay? Right. And specifically, that's where they're gonna stand when they're in the middle of the regiment after it bent back and extended the line. So, Jeff, whose name will we not see on the monument, and how do you like that guy?
Okay, I'll give you a little introduction to this. A number of battlefield guides have come up to me and said, "Will you please tell people this, that the character in the Killer Angels, the character of Buster Kilrain, is not real. He's a fictitious character." I can't, and it's happened to me. I can't tell you how many people have come up. They look at the monument right here. They look at all the names of the dead from the 20th Maine. I mean, it's a pretty intense monument. And nowhere on that is Buster Kilrain. And I can't tell you how many people have come up and asked me, why? You know, why isn't he there? Well, if they saw the movie or read the book, they know what happens to Buster. So it's a logical question to ask. He's a fictitious character. It was my father's way of putting himself into the story. Kilrain's personality, the sort of cynical guy to counter Chamberlain's idealism, that was my father. My father thought you needed that. Remember, the Killer Angels was written in the 1960s, a very cynical time, and my father felt that Chamberlain's idealism, believing in the peace of the angel in all men, that very Shakespearean notion, that you needed something to counter that. You needed something on the other side, and that was Buster Kilrain. So my father put him in as that character, but Kilrain he's not real, and he's not on the statue.
So just to make sure, Kilrain is not real. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay. How do you like Kilrain? Kilrain, you know, the battlefield guides have issues with him, but people like this guy. The way that Conway played him.
The nice thing about in the movie, Kevin Conway, the late Kevin Conway, the actor, did a magnificent job, and he was funny because he said, "I'm the only character with a good speaking role in this movie who's not an officer." The only enlisted man who has a good role. But beyond that, because of copyright law in this country, the only other person who can write that story or write a similar story and use the character of Buster Kilrain is me. I'm the son of the father. And so you meet Kilrain as Chamberlain meets Kilrain in Gods and Generals. You meet him for the first time, and again, he's carrying a cup of coffee up to Chamberlain. That's how Chamberlain meets him the first time. I had fun with that. I had so much fun with the character, knowing that the sort of blueprint my father had laid out for Buster, then I could just take it and run with it. And he even comes back in Last Full Measure, the third of the story, but of course he's already gone, so he comes back in sort of a figurative sense. Again, I had a lot of fun with that. I'm not going to give it all away, but it was a great deal of fun.
Good, so you heard it here. Jeff Shaara literally owns Buster Kilrain. That's pretty cool there. I like that. Jeff Shaara, of course, and I just got to say it, I mean, he's written all these books and about the Mexican War, about the American Revolution, about World War II and the Civil War, not only in the East, by the way, you know, and we'll look forward to seeing what he has next. But his recent book is The Eagle's Claw, and it is about the Battle of Midway, and I read the whole thing. I couldn't, in fact, if I'm unprepared for Gettysburg 158, it's because I had to finish that book before I started. I couldn't put it down. So check out The Eagle's Claw. Really good story. Even if you're not a World War II fan, you can just jump right into it and then see what else is going on. So, Jeff, you know, here we are. We're at Vincent Spur, one of the main places, if not the main place, in your father's book. You know, anything else to add here while we stand here, while you're talking to the members and supporters of the Trust?
Well, I think, and I don't know if the camera can do this justice maybe, but standing in this place, you can hear cars in the background. There's roads, there's paved roads right out here in front of me. None of that, of course, was here. Here comes a bus.
And of course, yeah, it's a bus right now.
And the rocks the rock wall that's very close to us right here was actually about 20 or 30 feet down the hill, a little bit farther down. And of course, out, you know, where we're looking out here, that was all just, it was sort of ragged woods where the Alabamans came up. It's so obvious to see what happens here when you realize, you know, if you're imagine you're 4 o'clock in the afternoon, it's probably like it is today, 90 degrees, you're running out of water, and you have to go up a hill, and then you have to go up a hill again. Well, what are you going to do? You're going to go to the least hill you can find, and that's right over here. You've got flat ground that goes right around Little Round Top, right? It's the end of Little Round Top, the boundary line. And of course, this is where the Confederates are going to tend to want to funnel through. And of course, what that does to Chamberlain's men, they've got to keep spreading out and spreading out. And as the Alabamans come up, they begin to come up back here because they're coming all the way around this nice flat ground. And that's why Chamberlain's men, you know, as Garry said, the monument sits where the flag bearer, I have some doubts about that, but it could be. But then the line goes that way. So the two halves of Chamberlain's line, unlike in the movie where it shows a gate like so, it's actually like this, where the two halves of his line, virtually these men are back to back. And what that's like, I can't imagine what that's like, because if either side gives, it's all over. And actually it's Colonel Oates talks about where he was on the last charge, and he talks about being back here with his flag bearer. And I don't know the exact spot, but he talks about a certain rock, and people have located that. That's incredible. I mean, you know, so the Confederates made it, you know, they're fighting over there, they're fighting here, they're fighting back here. And again, not to make it a history lesson, but that's just what makes it a story. And that's what gets me, you can probably tell, it's what gets me excited talking about it.
And Jeff says he's not a historian, but he knows his stuff. You'll find this out if you read any of his books about any of the historical periods he writes about. Now, this is a little bit odd here because we're rolling and we're going to continue to roll. We're just going to say goodbye to Jeff. So thanks so much for joining us, Jeff. You're a great friend to preservation.
Thanks.
Not to mention a great dad, husband, and all other things.
Thanks.
You're a great guy.
I'm just going to go sit down on my rock over here until the next camera comes by, and then I'll be ready
I
again.
think someone might be lined up here, unless they're waiting for Kris White. So thanks so much, Jeff.
Okay, take
Appreciate
care.
it. All right, so we still have Kris White behind the camera. We're going down Vincent's Spur over here, and you know, this is the charge and countercharge of the 15th Alabama and the 20th Maine here. Let me navigate the rest of this path, and then I'll pick it up.
Yeah, and keep in mind, this area has changed dramatically since 1863. The road systems that were put through here were devastating. Old Chamberlain Avenue would have been right down through here. It actually cuts right into the 20th Maine position. You would have this intersection over here where Warren Avenue is. This would lead you down to Devil's Den, up to Little Round Top. This is just going to change the topography greatly to try to understand where the Alabamians, the 15th and 47th, came in and attacked the 20th Maine as well as Company B, which would be over in that direction under Walter Morrell.
Ooh, I'm so glad you brought that up, Kris. So, because we're going to walk over there. We're not done yet, but here's the view, except without all the undergrowth. Remember, this was all grazed by livestock, and they were open woodlots, so you'd be able to see pretty far. Thanks, Kris. So, you know, so you're really looking at it. But, you know, here is an area where, you know, the fighting is here, and that whole time, there are U.S. Sharpshooters in Company B of the 20th Maine over at a stone wall, what, 200 yards away or something like that. But before you get there, and in this idea that Kris just said, trying to figure out who's where, we have a few great things. First of all, the 20th Maine placing their monument and their legend somewhere up there. I mean, it's obvious where the position would be, just being here by the terrain. But right out there, about 70 yards down, you're going to see a big rock. And Colonel William C. Oates on August 8th, 1863, wrote in his official report that his unit kept attacking this way and his right was near this rock. But then he said he extended his line, allowing himself to pivot around that rock and take up a line of rocks that was perpendicular to the one he had just abandoned. In other words, he went to that rock that you can see, and when you go there, there's a line of rocks running off exactly perpendicular to this, and it's just perfect. When an official report and the battlefield together say the same thing, boom. That's when the historian is happy. That's when you have dessert. You're with the American Battlefield Trust. We were just with New York Times bestselling author Jeff Shaara. What a great treat to be with him. We hope you'll share this with your friends, and we hope you'll read The Eagle's Claw or his numerous Civil War books here. Now, we're walking along Little Round Top, and I'm glad Kris brought up something else, and that is, we were talking earlier on part 1 of this Little Round Top series. You know, these roads that are here, right? Kris just mentioned that you see this intersection. This intersection disturbed substantial parts of the battlefield where Wright Avenue and South Confederate Avenue and Warren Avenue and Sykes Avenue actually come together, okay? You know, but again, I mean, are you not providing access for visitors? You know, there was some substantial destruction, but I would suggest that what you can see here still gives you a flavor. Just look at this, Kris. a good flavor of the position of the 20th Maine, of what the Alabamians had to do on a very hot day after an overnight march. And man, today is hot. I can't even imagine if I was carrying 50 pounds of stuff each. Kris?
So I just want to piggyback off of what Jeff kind of talked about, and memory is very important to Civil War historians. A lot of people will scream about people being revisionist or whatever, but you need to study these folks as people. Putting them up on pedestals it can be very damaging to the way you actually look at folks, and you need to look at what they did before the Battle of Gettysburg. What happened at the Battle of Gettysburg? What did they do after the Battle of Gettysburg? What choices did they make in life? So as you sit here and you start to look, the Battle of Little Round Top is not just a Civil War battle where we have the 47th, 15th Alabama coming down into this section, 20th Maine behind us. This will turn into a battle of memory after the war. Joshua Lawrence Chamberlain is one of the central characters, as Jeff talked about. And he will be a polarizing character, not only, as you heard, within the literary community, but within the community of the 20th Maine. Ellis Spear, his second in command here, absolutely despises this man after the war. He will write pretty much that anything that Joshua Lawrence Chamberlain says is a lie, and that he was a liar when I went to college with him, and he's a liar today. He'll talk about a procession going down through graduation when they go to Bowdoin College in the 1880s, and Chamberlain's the president of Bowdoin at that point. And Spear is on the staff as well. I believe he's in the mathematics department, and he sees the procession go down, and someone says, "There's Chamberlain, the man who saved Little Round Top." And he supposedly stops the procession, according to Spear, and is going to lean down and say, "I saved the Union at Little Round Top." Now, Spear, there could be jealousy here. There could be truth, and there could be something in the middle. He's going to be very, very vitriol in his hatred towards Joshua Lawrence Chamberlain, but others will question his interpretation of charging down this hill. Theodore Garrish, who has there's a fantastic book about him, talks about it. And it doesn't just end here. We go over to Vincent's spur, and we talk about Strong Vincent himself, that 26-year-old Harvard graduate who's mortally wounded up near the 44th New York Monument. He is not going to be able to tell a story, but the guidon bearer who was here with him will try to tell that story, Oliver Norton. Norton for throughout much of the battle is hiding behind a rock because he's drawing Confederate fire, because he's holding a big flag up there. In later life, he's going to fight the battle to see that Strong Vincent was the guy who saved Little Round Top because he was on his staff. Then you look over at Gouverneur Kimball Warren. Gouverneur Kimball Warren, 31 years old, he's the guy who a lot of people say is the true hero of Little Round Top. Warren, prior to the Battle of Gettysburg, is the chief topographical engineer. He goes on after this to become the 2nd Corps commander, then the 5th Corps commander. And 8 days before the American Civil War ends, at the Battle of Five Forks, he is relieved of command unfairly. Warren could have been relieved of command many times during the Civil War. He was a haughty fellow, and Charles Wainwright has the best quote about General Warren. He'll say that he has a screw loose and is not accountable for all of his little freaks. But Warren is what I would call manic depressive, and I learned a lot about him, reading his letters. Warren will write to his wife, pouring out his heart, and when he is relieved of command on April 1st of 1865 at Five Forks, a new battle begins, and that is the battle over his reputation, which he will fight all the way up until his death. In fact, there'll be a court of inquiry, which is the who's who of the U.S. military. Men like Fitzhugh Lee, Joshua Lawrence Chamberlain, and even George Custer from the grave will testify about what happened and what Gouverneur Kimball Warren did. He'll die before the committee tells what the finding is, if he is innocent or guilty, and he's found innocent on most of his charges. But he's buried before his death in a plain black suit, and he tells Emily, "I have died a disgraced soldier." So his friends in 1888 will spend $5,000. That equates to $142,000 today to put the first general officer standing statue on the battlefield here at Gettysburg in August of 1888 to tell his story. Out here on the battlefield, the Confederates will try to do the same thing. William C. Oates will try to put a monument out here. Joshua Lawrence Chamberlain, yeah, that's a great idea. And then behind his back will say, no, they didn't do anything what they're saying over here. So there's another battle that takes place out here. And some of these men, like Patty O'Rourke, will never be able to tell his story, but Porter Farley, one of his adjutant, will be able to tell his story. We have Stephen Weed, who's not able to tell his story, or Charles Hazlitt. But we have others take up the mantle. And usually when they take up the mantle, it's because they respected that officer. But not always. They themselves are trying to shape that historical narrative. And that's the narrative that we are still trying to unpack to this day. And there's a lot of things that happen out here on the battlefield. And near this spot, one of my favorite guys is going to be wounded, Michael Bulger of the 47th Alabama Infantry. He's 57 years old. He's out here on the battlefield. This is his second wound during the war. He's wounded in 1862, and the story goes he takes 2 corn cobs, puts them on the side of his wound, and then wraps it with some suspenders, which are, you know, straps as they called them at the time, and he wraps it up, and that's how he is going to go on. Here at Gettysburg, he's shot through the breast, thought to be mortally wounded. Amazingly, will live until 1900 with that ball lodged here in Gettysburg up against his left shoulder blade for the rest of his life. So there's all kinds of different stories out here, and the Confederates have their own problems we can't even get into between John Bell Hood, Lafayette McLaws, and James Longstreet. That's a story for another time.
Thanks so much, Kris. Let's keep walking. That was great stuff, Kris, because, you know, I mean, these are people just like us. It's so easy to think that, like Kris said earlier, these are marble people and you're going to put them up on a pedestal. No. When they were going through it, maybe they had great responsibilities, and maybe later in life people came up to them and they were treated differently, but they were just like us. They had the same quibbles, the same, you know, hopes and dreams to have, you know, a safe family and to provide for them and to, you know, enjoy their lives and stay healthy and everything like that. You're with the American Battlefield Trust. We are now walking on the sort of the south slope of Little Round Top. This is known as the saddle between Big Round Top, which is off to the camera's left there, and Little Round Top. So trust me, that's Big Round Top over there. You can't quite see it. And you might be able to catch, Kris, some of these stone walls here. Most of the stone walls on the battlefield were not built by soldiers. They were built by the veterans themselves. I'm sorry, I keep saying that. They were built by the thrifty Pennsylvania Dutch farmers who had to clear their fields of stone anyway. So most of them encircled their properties with stone walls. But no, these walls were built by the soldiers themselves, mostly after the July 2nd fighting was over. And you could say a lot of good it did them then, you know. So it was built as protection and built from protection against the skirmishing and sharpshooters here. We have a wall here actually that some of the Pennsylvania Reserves and the Massachusetts soldiers will use actually later. And I'm not sure if Kris wants to pull up a photo of 1990s Garry where I'm sitting on a rock over there, but they had cleared, before they were doing controlled burns, some of this land in the mid 1990s. And I actually came across, and I'm pointing to it, one of the missing Massachusetts plaques that had been gone for 30 years or something like that and had been missing. They were easily broken and someone just stashed it under a rock after it broke. And then I was able to give it back to the park. I still don't think those things aren't meant to last, but it is within the park collections, and that's great. I'm not saying go out to your battlefield and look for things, but if you see something, tell the park rangers so that it can, you know, get into the collections and whatnot. So you've got these Massachusetts soldiers under Tilton's brigade. Hey, wait, I thought they were fighting near the Wheatfield and the Trossel farm. No, they're here on July 3rd. Just like the Pennsylvania Reserves, Fisher's brigade mostly, are going to be behind this stone wall, and then they're going to be up on Big Round Top along with who? The 20th Maine, who after fighting here ended up on top of Big Round Top, being the left flank again briefly before more soldiers become the new left flank. And it goes all the way out to the Tawnytown Road, and then it goes all the way out with Howe's, some of Howe's division, out even further than that. So the Union fishhook is not a fishhook for very long at all.
And if you want to see a video of us hiking up this old trail, look at 157 Gettysburg. Check us out on YouTube or Facebook. We walked up there last year with a whole gaggle of us.
You know, and I actually forgot about that, Kris. Thanks for the reminder. So we're coming up, and we're not going to go too much further here, but this is Warren Avenue. It was not here during the battle, and many people have started to sort of figured like, okay, well, this is where these woods actually were. If you gaze down the road here, Kris, you can see that as we get a little further, there's no woods on the right, and there are woods on the left. That's not how it was for the most part, especially as we get down a little further. These woods were 150 to 200 yards further back. I mentioned that while we were on Little Round Top. And why do I care about that? Well, because if the Confederates are advancing over an extra 150 yards of terrain and they're launching 4 or 5 attacks, wow. You know, that's some substantial distance they're having to cover under fire the entire time.
And I'm going to show a picture again here that shows just how open this was. We're actually looking towards the 83rd Pennsylvania Monument. Take my word for it, but this is what it would look like as it would be cleared off. So this hillside's going to change a lot over the years. And then one thing I want to point out is the 9th Pennsylvania Monument. I have to point that out because they're a Pittsburgh unit, and it has one of my favorite monuments here on the battlefield of a soldier standing there kind of over another soldier's grave, just kind of pontificating or remembering one of his friends. And that unit will see heavy action, as will all the Pennsylvania Reserves throughout the American Civil War. And their first commander, if you want to look at stories like Carol Reardon had on one of our other videos, look at in December of 1862 at the papers around Pittsburgh and read about just what this unit and specifically their first commander, Conrad Jackson, went through. He is killed at Fredericksburg, very close to our land at the Slaughter Pen Farm.
That's great. Two things real quick. Number one, Kris, what part of Pennsylvania are you from?
It would be western Pennsylvania near Pittsburgh.
Oh, Pittsburgh. What do you know? And then secondly, real quick, let me just save everybody the trouble. 9th Pennsylvania Reserves, what is that? Add 29. Add 29. Take 9 and add 29. And the 9th Pennsylvania Reserves is the 38th Pennsylvania Infantry. The 1st Pennsylvania Infantry, 1st Reserves is the 30th Pennsylvania Infantry. There. Thank me later. So as we walk, you might actually get finally a view of the 83rd Pennsylvania Monument. So you can see how wooded it actually is around there now. And on top is a guy who is not Strong Vincent. It looks just like Strong Vincent because there was a rule that you could not put your original or any colonel up there on your regimental monument. And they said, okay, we'll just put someone up there who looks not only exactly like Strong Vincent, but who looks like Strong Vincent in the one famous picture of him. Sort of broad-chested, standing there and getting ready. So and they got away with it somehow. Strong Vincent was a beloved character at the time. So, they had to submit the monument. It got approved. They made it, and here it stands to this day. And I don't think anybody really minds at this point. Now, the last story, and Kris might have more to say, but the last story I want to tell is right over here somewhere. And it's a story about commercialization at Gettysburg. So, there was a photographic studio at Devil's Den near the Slaughter Pen. You've heard us talk about this before. There would be a video of it. But if Kris can find way over there the photo of the building without anything on it first. So there was a commercial building, and when the U.S. government successfully argued in the Supreme Court that they could condemn land for purposes of a park, and the park down at Devil's Den, Tipton Park, was condemned, they took a building over there, the one that you just saw there, or that you're seeing now, and they rolled it up here on rollers bodily, and they put it right about here. I'll be able to show you the actual spot when we do the outro here. So it was sitting right here, and they put it here so that a guy named Davy Weichert could actually operate a souvenir and snack stand here on Little Round Top. They felt bad for the guy. He's a local dude, and he had lost his sight. He's known as Blind Davy. And he was able to operate his souvenir stand right here, okay? He was hurt while working on the trolley track or the railroad or something like that. They felt bad for him. They let him in. So there was a souvenir stand here, and you could read on the picture maybe what you could get. And here's the best part. I don't know if you've been actually looking at this already, but Blind Davy, you can see him. He's got a seeing eye dog. Blind Davy has a gun. Okay, I'll credit Tim Smith for that particular joke, and the Shriver House Museum in Gettysburg, which you should check out for that particular photo there. And what I'm going to do is show you the foundation of some of the kind of either plumbing or something they had there, and then we'll see if Kris has anything else to add. The sole remnant of Blind Davy's souvenir stand. Kris, anything to add?
No, I think that if you get a chance to, very shortly, Little Round Top's going to be closing down, but you can check out everything on our virtual tours. You can check out our Facebook pages, and with the refurbishment of Little Round Top will make it a very, very visible place and very visited place once again. So get out here if you don't have the chance, because it'll be shutting down soon.
Good, yeah, Little Round Top is being loved to death, and we have to do some restoration. It's going to be painful for a year and a half, but we'll likely shoot even more videos than we already have up here to try to, make that pain a little bit less so. So thanks to Kris for all the filming. Thanks belatedly again to Jeff Shaara. Thank you all for watching and for sharing and for supporting Battlefield Preservation and Education.